Hi, Gino Borges with the Wild Self. I want to bring you this visual essay called Burning Man, BLM, and Bullying. BLM stands for Bureau of Land Management, and Bureau of Land Management is responsible for giving the permits and managing Black Rock Desert, which is where Burning Man Festival takes place. And what's interesting is that I just went to Burning Man. This is my 5th year there, and BLM agents are on the premises, are on the desert managing affairs. But I always find, I'm just using BLM as an example because I had first-hand experience with, the bullying element. And it reminds me of when I was in graduate school and I was studying the Stanford Prison Studies, of the power of what happens to somebody's identity and their motives once they put on a uniform. It becomes a type of authorial exercise, an authorial motive, that whenever somebody puts on a uniform, that they take on the role and the duties and the deeds of that particular uniform. So in the Stanford Prison Study, what happened was that they had these innocent students, students dressed up as prisoners and the other ones dressed up as cops. And both sides knew that they were just students. But as the days went on, as the guards wore their guard uniform and the prisoners wore their prisoner uniforms, there was a prisoner-guard relationship, and the prisoners started feeling inferior, and the guards started taking the superior attitude toward the prisoners. It's a famous study that would never happen in academia today because there's all types of protections for subjects to go on and do these particular studies, but it's very insightful if you haven't studied it before. But it happens everywhere around us. As you know, I spend a lot of time discussing the idea of identity because I think that in modern culture, identity is motive. If you want to know why people do the things that they do, we have to look at identity because we have so few reference. We're so ungrounded that what we become are the mask that we wear. In this case, on a first-hand example, or first-hand example with BLM agents, where they were doing these random checks of people as you drove into Burning Man, and they had the canine dogs out there and bulletproof vest on, and they're packing heat. And the interesting part about this is that this is sort of like a counterculture, sort of hippie festival. And so obviously people are bringing numerous drugs out there and all kinds of stuff. And it's sort of like known that everybody does that. But there was type of like, all of a sudden a few of my friends got pulled over, and it was interesting sort of the interrogation tactics that were actually used. And I was just surprised by it, and then another part of me is when I started thinking about it, I was like, no, because the more you instill somebody with that uniform, you take the uniform off them, and all of a sudden they become like normal people. Anybody who wears any type of uniform is going to take on this authorial attitude. They have to exude the power of the uniform. And we had another encounter with the BLM. We parked in the wrong section, and they woke us up at 5 o'clock slamming on our window telling us to move. Instead of just realizing that we made an error, it was a very sort of gruff manner. And I found it interesting how in this context, they became very aggressive. And I spent a lot of time out on BLM land, and interestingly enough, here's another thing that happens. Most BLM agents that I've met in northern Nevada are great when you meet somebody individually. Like, they've been very helpful to me when it's just one BLM agent doing their whole route. There's only like 2 BLM agents for all of the Black Rock Desert, if that. But when Burning Man comes, all of a sudden, I don't know what happens. I don't know what type of agreement they have with the Burning Man organization, but obviously there's a lot more BLM agents there. There's tons of them. And as a result, what happens is that when the collective, now when all of a sudden you go from 1 to 2 to dozens, all of a sudden there becomes a critical mass of that identity and a much more of an opportunity to show the prowess of that identity, the authorial uniform. And so I just use this as an example, but it's everywhere. It's everywhere. Anytime somebody's wearing a mask, somebody's going to take on that particular attitude, going to take on that motive, and that becomes their license for their behavior. And you can't fault the messenger because a soul is behind that mask. But during that immediate time, it's like so hard because it really grips you about the power of when the carcass of the identity, or the identity just takes over one's carcass and just envelopes them. And you see it all over the place. You see it with people in business, you see it with people in law enforcement, politics, whatever it is. Wherever people are wearing a mask, you're going to see power. And people are going to want to exude it because it's basically a warrant for why they're doing their job. And there's good people, there's good people doing good work. And when you put that uniform on it, we have to know as a culture how to negotiate with them. And also, people that put on uniforms need to understand the effect that the uniform has on their psyche and their behavior. And also to know the perception that they're creating in the very public that they're working with. So, anyways, that's Burning Man, BLM, and bullying. The title of this session and the title of this essay, and hopefully you enjoyed it and found it insightful. And thank you, everybody. This is Gino Borges with The Wild Self. Thank you.